This is a Bloody Vegans production.
Absolutely. So it has been quite a journey. I was an avid meat eater back in sort of up until 2015. I loved rare steaks, sushi, sashimi, and then literally I read a book and went vegetarian overnight. So I've kind of approached veganism through the vegetarian route initially, as I think probably a lot of the vegans do. It was literally a book that changed my perspective on everything, and I read the whole thing in one evening and woke up veggie. So that was kind of my first step into the world of plant-based food and eating and lifestyle. And I was veggie for a year and a half, then came across Veganuary. I think it was on Facebook that I saw a few adverts for it and thought, do you know what? It's only a step further than vegetarianism. I'd kind of seen a couple of documentaries at this point as well. The usual suspects, things like Forks Over Knives and Earthlings. And I decided to do Veganuary 2017. I went in all guns blazing, I wore the wristband and everything. And I realised that it really wasn't that much harder than being vegetarian. I think because I'm a really avid cook as well. It was really easy to adapt to vegan food because I love being creative in the kitchen. So it was just a new challenge for me, really. It was challenging on the people front, and in particular friends and family. I've got a lot of French family in there that really don't understand, veganism, let alone vegetarianism, let alone veganism, I should say. And they were very concerned and kind of thought I'd gone a bit loopy. So that was a bit of a challenge for a couple of years. But since then, I've really come into my own. I think during lockdown, I took that as an opportunity to sign up to the Vegan Chef School of Excellence with Chef Day Radley, who I think you've actually spoken to on one of your previous shows. So I did that. That was, it took about 6 months to complete the chef diploma. And then I got so interested in the Vegan Chef School that I did another course as well, the Vegan Nutrition Diploma, which, again, a lot of questions that people ask vegans is about nutrition and, where do you get your protein from? Where do you get your iron from, your B vitamins, etc. So just having that as an actual qualification to back me up when I'm having those unfortunate arguments. But so that's been great. I also started an Instagram account, just taking pictures of everything that I eat, because obviously, meat eaters sometimes say, what do you actually eat? And it's easier to just show them than try and talk them through what you can and don't eat. So I've gone from meat eater to vegan in, I think, 5 years vegan, 1.5 veggie before then.
And what was the book, out of interest, that triggered all of this?
It was Skinny Bitch by Kim Barnewin, I think, and Rory Friedman. Mm.
Right. And what was the message that particularly resonated?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, the reason I read the book in the first place, I was house sitting for a friend and I couldn't get her TV to work. So I was like, okay, I'll have to read a book. And I picked up this book because it had quite sort of tongue-in-cheek title, obviously, and it didn't really make any claims to be about veganism or vegetarianism. It was just about weight management, basically. So I read it, and it starts off with an introduction, the obvious things that you think about, like fats and sugars and exercise. But then it started talking about dairy, the effects on the body of dairy, animal fats, and then out of nowhere, this chapter about abattoir workers. So there was actually excerpts from, I think it was called Memoirs of an Abattoir Worker, and it was frankly shocking. It was absolutely horrific, and these were memoirs that came from abattoir workers across the world, different sort of sizes of farms, etc. It just really kind of hit home that there's no such thing as this mythical McDonald's, farm where all the animals are treated really well and they have a very happy life and death. That was the chapter that really shocked me and kind of gave me a bit of a kick up the backside to do something about it. I realised that I had a choice. Read the whole book in one evening, woke up the next morning vegetarian.
Yeah. And at the time, obviously, you mentioned you went vegetarian. pretty much immediately after reading that book, and I can kind of understand reading some of those kind of shocking accounts. Veganuary obviously came along a little bit later, and you mentioned there's a lot of documentaries along the way. Was it a bit of a surprise to you when you started to learn about dairy and eggs and these other aspects of that make up the kind of gap between vegetarianism and veganism?
Yes, definitely. I think when I went vegetarian, I loved cheese and I enjoyed eggs, and I thought, this is a compromise really. But my view was that, which a lot of people have, which is that dairy and eggs are a byproduct, a natural byproduct. The animals aren't harmed in the creation and the production of it, which is of course not the case. And the more I researched, the more I saw documentaries, the more reading I've done on my own account, the more I've realised that's absolutely not true. That's something that we're led to believe, that cows just create milk because they're cows. I didn't realise that the cow had to be pregnant or nursing in order to create the milk. And then same with hens, the fact that hens are pumped with all kinds of chemicals to make them produce more eggs, that they're led to live very cruel circumstances, cruel environments. That again, I just kind of brushed under my own little carpet. I think I didn't want to think about it. But when I realised the scale and the fact that it's not just the odd big farm in another country that I don't want to think about, that's being cruel and keeping animals in these conditions, it's actually much, much more widespread and large scale than that. That really hit home to me, and I realised that if I was going to do the right thing, then I needed to go the whole way and go vegan.
And how about Veganuary? Why Veganuary? Why was that the sort of the jump off point for you?
I think it was a combination of things. It was new year, new resolutions, fresh start. I think it's a good time of year to try something different or something that you might see as being a bit restrictive. So I think the timing was good. I think it was some adverts on Facebook that mentioned the community feel to it, the fact that you get support, you get updates, you get recipes, and you're able to join communities of like-minded people who are in a similar situation. So that made it feel a lot less isolating than just doing it myself. And that support from Veganuary was amazing. It was instrumental to me, firstly trying it in the first place, but then actually realising, do you know what? I might as well just keep doing this because I quite like it. So, yeah.
Did you know any other vegans before you started Veganuary in real life?
In real life. So my best friend has actually been vegan for quite some time. I think she went vegan back when we were at uni, and that was for health reasons for her. But then the more that she's been involved in vegan communities and meeting other vegans, she started to really think of it from the animal perspective and the environment perspective as well. And then through her, I know a couple of other vegans. I knew them before doing Veganuary, but actually since doing Veganuary, I've met loads more, but not actually directly through Veganuary, just because people are becoming vegan a lot more than they used to, it seems.
What was your perception? I mean, obviously they were friends, so you obviously had a pretty good relationship with them, but what was your perception of veganism, vegans prior to kind of making these shifts?
Back when I was a full-blown meat eater, I had a bit of a negative attitude towards vegetarians and vegans. I just couldn't get my head around what it was that they actually ate. And as I mentioned, I loved steak, I loved sushi, sashimi. Those were kind of my favourite things, and I'd have those at least once a week, and cheese. And so for my best friend, I think particularly in the beginning when she started the vegan diet, she struggled a bit, sort of knowing what to eat. And obviously as time's gone on and we've become more into cooking and that side of things, it's just become a lot easier. But my perception was, why would you do that to yourself? And also I think just this attitude of, if you're doing it for the animals or for the environment, then you're just one person, you're not going to really make a difference. So why bother? Why deprive yourself of something that you enjoy?
And things have obviously shifted in that particular regard. Talk to me a little bit about that, because that's quite a shift, and it's quite a common one that I've heard, insofar as people feeling like pretty powerless and then feeling quite empowered when they make this shift. Was there a particular thing that for you made you feel like actually it does make a difference, that as an individual I've made this choice?
Yeah, I think numerous things. I think firstly, the fact that the movement itself is growing so much and so successfully, seeing more and more people taking up Veganuary and actually becoming vegan, seeing more and more restaurants offering vegan options. Also, just walking down the high street, and every other restaurant's got something vegan advertised in their window, for sure. So I think the first thing was just seeing the movement grow and grow really successfully and fast, seeing more and more people joining Veganuary every year, more restaurants getting involved, providing vegan options and advertising, quite openly that they've got vegan options, new vegan recipes, vegan dishes. And just seeing the V word a lot more in general made me realise that it isn't such a tiny movement that, just a handful of hippies are trying to change the world, that it was actually, and it's not just, when it comes to those vegan options in restaurants and stuff, it's not just vegans who benefit from those. The more people that are making those options and just incorporating those into their day more, they are making a difference. Maybe not the biggest difference that they could make, but they are making a difference. So I think seeing that I was part of a movement really helped me to change my mind on that. You're just a drop in the ocean, a point of view that I had originally. But I think also just kind of being a bit stubborn, with the adversity that I was getting around, you're not going to make a difference. Just kind of being like, well, do you know what? It's a personal choice. It's a choice that I have, and I owe it to myself and to the animals and the environment to just make that choice and stick to it, really.
Absolutely. A fairly common experience that folks have, and you just sort of, as you were talking there, it reminded me of that experience, is being quizzed by friends and family over various things and challenged. Sometimes about nutrition, sometimes about the environment, sometimes about animal welfare. But you suddenly there's kind of an expectation that if you've made this shift, you have to be an expert in all things. Yeah. And you should know absolutely every statistic and every piece of information related to all of that stuff. Was that your experience? And if so, how did you kind of cope with that?
It was my experience. I think I can safely say I've probably heard it all the kind of catalogue of questions that I think we're used to as vegans, from where do you get your protein from, where do you get your iron from. People will hear that vegans don't get their B vitamins and that give them like mental deficiencies or like cerebral deficiencies, and it's amazing how many people seem to think that vegans don't get any protein or iron or B vitamins, despite the fact that protein and iron are pretty easy to get on a vegan diet, at least. Also the whole caveman argument, that's people seem to forget about evolution when they suggest that we should eat how the cave people ate. And then the argument that if we didn't kill these animals, they would take over the world. That's probably my favourite in terms of most ridiculous. But how did I? So I think in the beginning, to be honest, I didn't handle it very well. I think I was quite surprised by how confident people were in sort of initiating arguments, shall we say, when really my decision didn't impact them in any way, but they were pretty convinced that it was their prerogative to really sort of put me on the spot and try and catch me out with their questions. So in the beginning, I didn't handle it as well as I could have done. I think I was just a little bit taken aback and maybe on the defensive, to the point of sometimes maybe even getting a bit angry if it's like the fourth person that day that's asking me these kind of questions. When I really just want to be left alone and eat my food in peace. But I got better at it. I think I realised firstly that, the best way to get people round to your point of view is to just kind of empathise and be positive and be generous with your time and responses. But then I did also have to do quite a bit of work on educating myself on all of these topics. And Earthling Ed in particular has been an amazing resource for me. I mean, he's even put together like full full-blown guides on how to respond to questions around veganism, the common questions, and what the best way is to respond to those questions in a kind of almost like a coaching kind of way of getting people to think about their own perceptions and behaviours. But then, of course, doing the nutrition course as well has really helped me, because now I do kind of have a bit of a body of referenceable information from reputable sources that, you know, if you direct someone to some research from a major food standard authority or food authority, for example, that they can't really dispute, then that's helpful to have in the back pocket as well.
And how about overcoming some of those kind of cultural changes and those cultural differences? You mentioned with a lot of your family coming from a French background, and you know, I think that it's kind of widely sort of known what the sort of French cuisine is, quite meat, dairy heavy, and veganism is perhaps not quite as hasn't quite as flourished as well, apart from in the sort of major cities in France, or at least that's the narrative. Some folks over in France might correct me, but how did you kind of cope with that kind of element, where perhaps it's not necessarily about reasoned argument, but about actually essentially a cultural viewpoint that is different to yours?
Yeah, that has been challenging, and I think particularly because a lot of my kind of older family in France, they're quite traditional and very much have grown up their entire lives with exactly the kind of cuisine that you mentioned. They're very dairy heavy. Everything's cooked in butter. You have meat or fish at every meal, and even just having one vegetarian dish a day would be seen as quite radical, or, you know, you have to be on some kind of diet or something. But how have I overcome it? I mean, to be honest, I don't think I really have yet. I think particularly my older relatives in France, I think every time I speak to them, whether it's over the phone or in person, the vegan thing will always come up, and they've just not they've not got over it, even though it's been 5 years. My parents, so my mum's French, and yeah, I mean, she kind of alternates between accepting it and actually quite enjoying the challenge of cooking vegan food when I visit, to every now and again having a bit of a kind of struggling again, or going back to sort of asking me why, and aren't you missing this? Don't you think you're missing out, etc. So yeah, I think I'm not sure if I have actually overcome those cultural differences just yet.
Have you seen any shift in either their perspective, or any other of your kind of friends, family who've put up some resistance in the last kind of 5-6 years? Because it's kind of interesting to me that, you know, you mentioned it early on about the sort of the rise of veganism, and it made me think of kind of tipping points. You know, this idea that once we get to a certain tipping point in terms of the perception of it, in terms of the number of us, then other people who have perhaps sat on the fence might think, oh, do you know what? There is probably some sense in this. Have you seen in your experience from those friends and family any shift in that kind of 2015 through to now 2022?
Yeah, I think back in 2015, the world was quite a different place. I think the sort of vegan and vegetarian, particularly vegan movement, was not really mainstream. It was quite fringe, and I think that meant that those people who were objecting to it or struggling to understand it, they tended to sort of find it a lot easier to confront me about it. Whereas now I think the sheer volume, like you said, the tipping point, the fact that you hear about veganism, you know, my grandparents, they'll even in the sort of quite more traditional magazines and things that they get, there will be an article every now and again about vegetarianism or veganism, which there never used to be, which I think helps them to realise that I am not the only one, and that it is a really quite big and growing movement, and that if this many people are doing it, and, you know, they haven't shriveled up and died, or, you know, gone off to join a commune or whatever, which is, I think, what they were expecting to happen, either of those things to happen to me, that they are just becoming more accepting, and I think that will only increase. I certainly don't see tolerance towards veganism decreasing, particularly as the number of vegans increases.
It's interesting to me. You obviously going on the nutrition course, as you say, with Chef Day Radley and the Vegan Chef School, which obviously they're doing phenomenal work, and still relatively it's pioneering. It's not even relatively; it is pioneering. There aren't many others doing similar things out there in that kind of vegan space. And obviously, you went on the nutrition course, which I'm particularly kind of interested in from the point of view of your motivation for doing that. Did you have concerns almost, or want to at least solidify your understanding of the nutritional aspect of it, to feel extra kind of confident in your lifestyle shift?
I didn't have concerns as such. I think it really was a case of having that bank of knowledge that I could refer to if I do get resistance, especially around the nutritional side of things. But also I've been thinking about my sort of longer term career path, what I might end up doing in a few years' time, maybe sort of maybe potentially part-time or whatever initially. But I'm really, really curious about the concept of advising people who are looking to make the transition into being vegan, who might not have the knowledge or resources or kind of creativity in the kitchen that with a bit of support could make the whole process a lot easier and more enjoyable for them. So I completed the Vegan Chef diploma, so that was really around meal creation and recipe creation, and then sort of tagging on the nutrition course as well. That would enable me to kind of put together meal plans, recipe plans that meet people's nutritional requirements and specific individual requirements as well, because obviously everyone's different. So that's kind of somewhere I'd like to explore in the future in terms of maybe a bit of a twist to my career path.
Was there anything you got out of those courses that actually was really new news to you in terms of, I mean, obviously I imagine it all was to some extent, but was really new news to you in terms of, I need to tweak this in my own kind of diet?
Yeah, so a couple of things that I found really interesting that I had no idea about. So a couple of things that are actually suggested by, I think it's Michael Greger in his book, How Not to Die. Tips like how to prepare your cruciferous vegetables in a way that really maximizes the nutrition that you get. So I obviously knew not to boil the life out of my vegetables, but a couple of tips on just, chopping your cruciferous vegetables an hour before you cook them, and the fact that prevents loss of nutrition. Also just exploring other types of sort of health cuisine, really, like raw vegan. I think learning just how much nutritional value gets depleted from vegetables when you do heat them in any way. I've just started adding a lot more raw vegetables and fruits into my diet, which I didn't have before. Even just like throwing a courgette into a dressing, just blending it up and using it as a salad dressing. Then I've got a raw courgette in my diet for the day. But things like that I think really small, easy changes that just maximize the amount of nutrition that you get. I think before I was just kind of trying to get my 5 a day and make sure that I didn't forget to take my B vitamin supplements. Whereas now I'm kind of trying to push towards more like 10, 12 a day, and maximizing everything combining foods that maximize each other's nutritional value as well.
It sounds like going right back that you as you mentioned, you really enjoyed at the time steak, sushi, sashimi, these kind of dishes. How have you found your palate changed, and was that quite difficult to overcome at first? Did you have a bit of a tussle between your taste buds and your ethics, or was it all pretty smooth in terms of the transition?
I was actually quite surprised how easy it was. I thought, because I've always been a massive foodie and I love flavours, and I thought I'm going to really miss out on certain things that I used to enjoy. But I think just kind of compartmentalising those memories in my mind, just being like, right, okay, I had a really good steak one time, I enjoyed it, but that's a memory now. I don't need to do it again. I can actually explore and enjoy completely new things. I think I think it's 20,000 different types of edible vegetables and plant-based foods out there. So I'm making completely different dishes every day, which is really exciting. And then doing the professional chef course as well was an eye-opener in terms of understanding flavors. So the flavors and tastes and things like umami, And we recreated some quite interesting dishes. We actually recreated sushi as part of the course, using like tomatoes and a smoking machine, and really trying to mimic the textures of sushi, and using seaweed as a flavouring if you want to get that fishy flavour. So I actually find it really more fun and interesting trying to replicate those things that I used to enjoy, and then enjoying the alternative, than kind of, feeling like I'm missing out.
Yeah. If you had your time again, you went back to the start of your vegan journey, is there anything you'd do differently looking back now with the knowledge you've got? And I guess that also forms a good bit of advice for folks who are kind of listening to this, perhaps because there's Veganuary in the title and they're thinking about their first steps into this world.
Yeah, I think I would probably educate myself a bit about what to expect in terms of the resistance that I would get from friends and family, or just meeting new people, colleagues, etc., when they find out that you're vegan or you're doing Veganuary. Just maybe having a read through Earthling Ed's resources, and just kind of being psyched and prepared for it, but also just to remember to be diplomatic and patient, and respond in a graceful way, even if it's starting to get a bit draining. Make time for yourself as well. If you've had enough of people sort of asking you questions, then just make sure you step away from the situation and just have a bit of a chill out, but just keep reminding yourself why you're doing it as well. And I think that's why Veganuary is so helpful, because you're getting literally kind of spoon-fed information and resources and recipes that you can't really go wrong with, and also the fact that there are so many great new options out there as well. If you were out and about and wanted to eat something vegan, you don't have to cook everything at home. There's so much out there now.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely right. That point you made there about, preparing yourself for the conversations you're going to have. I mean, I relate to your journey. I definitely found that was one of the toughest things to cope with, is not being someone who was particularly confrontational before. And so, and generally speaking, people don't tend to confront each other on their kind of ethical position on things in day-to-day kind of society, at least perhaps not in British culture too often. It's not kind of the done thing, if you like, to sort of call somebody out on why they're doing something, or why they choose to go to church, or whatever they choose to do. It doesn't tend to be something that's called out. So I definitely relate to that sense that felt actually one of the most difficult things, that almost the sorting out my own nutrition and all the rest of it was kind of, that's fine. But suddenly being questioned in a way that I'd not been used to, especially at your lunch table at work or whatever it was very, very unique. So yeah, totally relate to that kind of experience.
Yeah.
Thinking about Veganuary this year, for folks who are kind of in that space as well, and you obviously have had a background in loving cooking, for one. And one of the things that kind of concerns me, that I often talk to people about, because I'm just kind of intrigued as to people's perspective, particularly people who cook, is your view on the amount of kind of convenience-based products that are vegan right now, and particularly when we look at Veganuary, often the sort of supermarket shelves have got segments dedicated to Veganuary that have, a number of prepared products and this, that, and the other on. And I sort of, on one hand, I battle with, I think it's great and it's progress, and all these kind of things that you could say that it is. And on the other hand, I think they're often very expensive compared to their omnivorous alternatives, because those are being subsidised and all kinds of other reasons. But on face value, they are more expensive, and sometimes not even particularly great for you. At least if you were going to eat them all the time, they're nice products, but you wouldn't eat the processed omnivorous version all the time. So, why would we eat the vegan version? And I sort of worry for folks who are kind of coming into it, that they see that is veganism. So that's what they have to do. What's your kind of advice to those folks who perhaps aren't in love with cooking initially, and have just come to it, and they're in their supermarket?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because I think that the sort of ethical vegan side of me thinks that the more people are eating vegan food, the better, because the fewer animals are being slaughtered and the better it is for the environment, etc. However, like you say, if those items are heavily ultra processed, often contain a lot of, if the ingredients list is a paragraph long, then that it's probably not something that you would have made at home, and probably not particularly good for you either. I think there's a healthy balance to everything. I think if you sort of look at what you did eat when you were an omnivore, if you're planning to make the switch to vegan, have a look at trying to create alternatives to and whole plant food based alternatives to as much as possible as you can. And maybe it will be an opportunity to actually start spending more time in the kitchen if that's not something that you've really done before. It might actually be an opportunity to take up a new and interesting passion. And I find the foods that I enjoy the most are the foods that I've cooked, and that I've cooked with love and passion, and having spent a bit of time researching in advance, etc. But I appreciate that's not for everyone. I think there are also a number of kind of meeting halfway opportunities there. So things like Mindful Chef and All Plants, whereby you kind of don't have to do the full effort of cooking something entirely from scratch and doing the shopping and creating the shopping lists and buying individual items, but you still get the end result, the end meal, which is a lot healthier than something, probably a processed ready meal, for example. So that there are just so many options out there. I think, take the opportunity to try and get into cooking, but also just think about the balance that you've got there in terms of what you would have, how much processed food you would have eaten before going vegan, and whether that's a similar amount or whether you're kind of maybe veering a bit too much towards the ultra processed stuff. And I suppose on the price as well, like you say, it is a shame that things are slightly more expensive. I do wonder sometimes whether it is a sort of capitalisation on the movement, and the kind of perceived demographic, or like you say, there'll be other things at play, like subsidies for animal produce. But I think it's, as with everything in life, it's a balance, and just be kind of thoughtful and mindful of what you're putting in your basket whenever you're doing that weekly shop.
I love that point about thinking about how much of your diet before was processed. I think that's such a good piece of advice. It's a solid piece of advice, because I think I probably made initially. I wouldn't even say initially. Actually, I'd say initially. Actually, I was pretty good at cooking things, and then probably I started to discover processed, and then went a little bit down that path for a while, and started to think this is actually pretty expensive. I'm spending quite. I mean, I was fully committed to doing it, but I was kind of like, overall my weekly shop is more expensive and things like that. And I think that would have been a really good thing for somebody to have said to me at the time, was think about how much processed you ate before versus how much you eat now, and then go back and adjust that balance. I think that's a really important one to call out. I mean, I worry about these things from the point of view that they will ultimately lose people. They'll get to the end of January and then they'll think, do you know what? I thought that I was going to get all these amazing health benefits, but I ate a ton of sugar and fat, and both of which can be perfectly vegan, and I'm also a lot poorer than I was to begin with, so I'll give that up. So I think, again, you raised the point about businesses capitalizing on it, and again I flip flop between it supply and demand, it's good, so on and so forth, and that argument again that people will be turned off it. And so I kind of think it's incumbent upon us within the vegan community. I know Veganuary as an organisation do a great job in this space. The Vegan Society do as well. Talking to people about cooking, the Vegan Chef School, etc. Talking to people about what a healthy vegan diet could look like, just to help people along that kind of journey. It might be less profitable for the supermarkets and the big companies, but it's far more sustainable. You get the benefits of the health, you'll get the price, tin of chickpeas versus a steak, much cheaper, all those kind of things that we know about when we're a little bit further down the line. So I love that piece of advice. I think it's a really sound one. On that sort of note of advice, we've obviously talked about folks, if you like, who are omnivorous, sort of coming at you with their kind of their challenges over the lifestyle. But one of the other kind of impacts of turning vegan, I don't know if you felt this, is that you want to shout it from the rooftops. You feel like the scales have been pulled from your eyes, and you suddenly like see the world for what it is. There's often the kind of matrix, red pill, blue pill kind of analogy is used within the sort of the quote unquote vegan community. And I went through a bit of a period of I need to kind of like aggressively push this message and kind of almost give people a sort of a shake, if you like, not a physical one, I hasten to add, but a bit of a shake into reality and show them and so on and so forth. Was that an experience that resonated with you at all? And if it did, or even if it didn't, what would your kind of advice be to people who are kind of feeling some of those thoughts about wanting to share the message, but not necessarily feeling comfortable in how to do it?
Yeah, so I suppose, like you say, one of the things that sort of naturally happens when you become vegan is that you realise just how reasonable it is a change to make, and that it doesn't deprive you of anything, but the difference that you are making as an individual is huge. It's one of the biggest things you can do in terms of your individual impact on the environment. And then, of course, if you're vegan for the animals, then it speaks for itself, really. But I think talking about it in terms of the animals and the environment, I found people a bit less receptive to than talking about health. And I think people who've watched like Game Changers, for example, I mean, a load of people who previously to having watched Game Changers, they were kind of anti-vegan, didn't see the value in it, didn't really seem to care about the animals or the environment very much. But having watched that and putting it in the context of themselves, just completely changed their minds. They ended up incorporating a lot more plant-based food into their diets, etc. So I think if you're going to shout it from the rooftops, I think maybe just kind of know your audience and know what's going to appeal to them the most, because you can flog a dead horse with talking about cruelty, and when people have got that cognitive dissonance that they just don't want to accept it, they don't want to hear it, and they will kind of fight your argument to the end. But if you make it about them and the benefits to themselves, then I suppose to us, if more people become vegan, the better. It doesn't matter their personal reasons for it. So I suppose my advice would be know your audience, know what it is that will appeal to them about the vegan diet. And if that is that, it will be much, much better for their health and fitness, then that might be an angle to kind of approach it with.
Super sound advice that, and just sound advice generally, like, know your audience and understand who you're talking to and what buttons it will push for them personally. I think we all, once we're in the sort of quote unquote community, we see all these different angles and then think, well, any one of them is a good enough reason, because we're kind of deep into the understanding of it, if you like. Any one of them, whether it's environmental health or certainly animals, is like you say, it's apparent why you'd need to make this shift. So it can be a bit it feels a bit odd almost having to think about, well, why wouldn't somebody care about the life of another sentient being? Why wouldn't somebody care about planetary disaster and climate breakdown? It feels so obvious, and you can get these moments of frustration when there's something in the kind of zeitgeist that's popular, like Don't Look Up is a good example, where it's, everyone's talking about climate change and what can we do and this kind of stuff, and you as you say, the single biggest thing we can do is to adopt a plant-based diet and essentially go vegan, and yet somebody can watch that film and be told that information and still put up a barrier in between them and say, well, yeah, but I'm not going to personally do that. I mean, somebody needs to do something, but I don't need to do that. It's it can be frustrating. So I think it's a really, valuable sort of piece of advice to think about it from, from their perspective, and you think about yourself before you went vegan, and would everything have resonated with you? When you were loving steaks and sushi and so on, would it have all resonated with you at the time? Maybe not. So yeah, it's kind of treating people with the same kind of empathy we would have expected to have been treated with ourselves. I guess.
Exactly.
Super stuff. Well, look, time's getting on, Jules, and it's been a fabulous chat, and I think we've hopefully inspired some folks to take on Veganuary if they're thinking about it. And I guess if they're listening, they probably are already along the journey, so they've got some good solid advice. It sounds like your Instagram is a good place to start for a bit of inspiration. So I want to make sure that folks know whereabouts they can go and take a look at some of your amazing dishes. So where can folks find you?
Yeah, great. So it's basically a pictures of everything I've cooked or eaten over the last couple of years. So hopefully some inspiration on there. So my Instagram handle it's a bit of a nod to Superbad, plants in and around my mouth.
Amazing. Jules, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. I'll speak to you
All
again.
right, thank you so much.
This is a Bloody Vegans production.